Legendary Pokémon are some of the most nostalgic and exciting parts of the Pokémon series. They aren't just powerful battles or rare encounters, but symbols of the forces that shape the Pokémon world itself. Dialga exists at a level of the Pokémon world where ordinary rules no longer apply. It is not simply a powerful creature that controls time as an ability. Dialga is framed as something far more fundamental. Time does not flow around Dialga. Time exists because of it. From its introduction in the Sinnoh region, Dialga is presented less like an animal and more like a cosmic constant. Its presence defines structure. Days pass, moments connect, causes lead to effects, all because Dialga continues to exist. This framing immediately separates it from most legendary Pokémon, which are often guardians, forces of nature, or symbols of balance. Dialga is infrastructure. Dialga's steel and dragon typing reinforces this identity in a subtle but important way. Steel represents permanence, rigidity, and durability. Dragon represents primordial power and authority. Together, they suggest something ancient yet unyielding, a force that does not decay or adapt easily. Time, in the Pokémon world, is not fragile. It is reinforced. Dialga's physical design reflects this concept clearly. Its body is angular, armored, and symmetrical, with clean lines rather than organic curves. It looks engineered rather than evolved. The plates along its body resemble machinery as much as armor, suggesting that Dialga is part of a system rather than a participant in nature. The diamond embedded in Dialga's chest is one of its most important visual elements. According to lore, this gem is directly connected to its ability to control time. When it shines, time flows. When it is disrupted, time destabilizes. This makes Dialga's power both centralized and vulnerable, reinforcing the idea that even universal forces require structure. In Pokémon Diamond, Dialga is not portrayed as malicious or benevolent. It simply exists. Its awakening is not framed as an attack, but as a disturbance. Time begins to fracture because Dialga is being forced out of equilibrium. This framing is critical. The danger does not come from Dialga's intent, but from its displacement. This distinction makes Dialga feel less like a villain and more like a natural disaster. When it moves, reality reacts. Dialga's relationship with humans is distant and impersonal. It does not respond to prayer, worship, or fear. It responds to cosmic conditions. When humans interfere with the balance of the universe, Dialga reacts not emotionally, but mechanically. This is most clearly shown in the events surrounding Team Galactic. Cyrus does not attempt to control Dialga through negotiation or manipulation. He attempts to use it as a tool, assuming that time itself can be commanded. The resulting collapse of reality shows how flawed that assumption is. Dialga does not resist Cyrus out of defiance. It resists because it cannot function under those constraints. Time cannot be owned. Dialga's roar is described as having the ability to warp time itself. In the anime and games, its presence causes time to speed up, slow down, or fracture entirely. These effects are not precise or targeted. They ripple outward, affecting everything nearby. This reinforces the idea that Dialga's power is absolute but not delicate. Precision is not required when you are the source. Dialga's battles feel fundamentally different from other legendary encounters. It does not feel like a duel. It feels like proximity to something overwhelming. Even standing near Dialga is portrayed as dangerous, not because it is aggressive, but because reality becomes unstable in its presence. This instability is reflected mechanically as well. Dialga's signature move, Roar of Time, requires a recharge, not because Dialga is strained, but because time itself needs to reset. The pause is not weakness, it is recalibration. Dialga's calm demeanor reinforces its role as a constant. It does not thrash or rage. Its movements are slow and deliberate. When it attacks, it feels inevitable rather than forceful. Like time itself, it does not hurry. Dialga's connection to Mount Coronet is also significant. This location is described as the center of the Sinnoh region, where space and time intersect. Dialga's presence there is not coincidental. It is where the universe is most stable and where disruption is most dangerous. The Sinnoh myths describe Dialga as having been born alongside Palkia and Giratina, created by Arceus itself. This origin places Dialga outside the natural cycle of Pokémon birth and evolution. It was not shaped by environment. It was defined by purpose. Dialga's rivalry with Palkia is not personal. It is structural. Time and space must coexist, but they are always in tension. When one asserts dominance, the other destabilizes. This tension is not conflict. It is balance under strain. When Dialga and Palkia clash, reality bends, cities distort, dimensions tear. This is not because they hate each other, but because their coexistence requires equilibrium. Too much of either collapses the system. Dialga's absence is just as dangerous as its excess. Without time, existence cannot progress. Nothing can change. Everything freezes. This makes Dialga uniquely terrifying in a quiet way. It does not need to act to be dangerous. It only needs to stop. In the anime, Dialga is often portrayed as distant, even solemn. It does not communicate in ways humans understand. When it does interact, it is through shifts in reality rather than dialogue. Time accelerates or rewinds. Messages are delivered through cause and effect rather than speech. This reinforces Dialga's alien nature. It does not think in moments, it thinks in timelines. Dialga's steel typing also suggests that time in the Pokémon universe is fixed, not fluid. While individuals can experience it differently, the structure itself is rigid. Time can be bent, slowed, or fractured, but not erased easily. This rigidity is what makes disruptions so catastrophic. Time resists change, and when forced, it breaks violently. Dialga's presence in Pokémon lore raises questions about free will. If time exists because Dialga exists, are events predetermined? The games do not answer this directly, but they imply that while time provides structure, choice still exists within it. Dialga does not decide outcomes, it enables them. This distinction is subtle but important. Dialga is not fate. It is the medium through which fate and choice interact. Dialga's design, lore, and behavior all reinforce the same idea. It is not a character in the traditional sense. It is a system given form. That is why Dialga rarely feels emotional. Emotion implies reaction. Dialga does not react, it maintains. Even when captured, Dialga does not feel owned. The Pokéball becomes a container for something far larger than its size implies. The act feels symbolic rather than literal. Dialga's continued existence is necessary whether humans acknowledge it or not. It does not need belief, it needs balance. In the broader Pokémon world, Dialga represents inevitability. Not death, not destruction, but progression. The certainty that moments move forward, that change happens, and that nothing remains static forever. Dialga is not dramatic. It is foundational. And because of that, it remains one of the most conceptually powerful and quietly unsettling legendary Pokémon ever created. Palkia exists as the counterpart to Dialga, but its role is not secondary or reactive. Where Dialga defines time, Palkia defines space itself, the structure that allows anything to exist at all. If time governs when events occur, space governs where they can occur. Without Palkia, distance collapses, locations lose meaning, and reality has no framework to occupy. From its introduction in the Sinnoh region, Palkia is framed as a cosmic boundary rather than a creature that simply travels through space. It does not move within space the way other Pokémon do. Space bends, stretches, and reshapes around it. Locations are not fixed in Palkia's presence. They are variables. Palkia's water and dragon typing communicates this idea in a symbolic way. Water represents fluidity, motion, and adaptability. Dragon represents authority, origin, and scale. Together, they suggest that space in the Pokémon world is not rigid and static, but elastic and responsive, capable of expansion and distortion when acted upon by something powerful enough. Palkia's physical design reflects this elasticity. Its body is smoother and more organic than Dialga's, with flowing lines rather than sharp angles. Where Dialga looks engineered and reinforced, Palkia looks like something that can shift shape without breaking. Its limbs appear flexible, its posture more dynamic, as though it is constantly adjusting to the space it occupies. The pearl embedded in Palkia's shoulder is the focal point of its design and power. According to Sinnoh lore, this pearl is directly tied to its control over space. When it glows, dimensions distort, distances compress or expand. Entire locations can overlap or vanish. Space ceases to behave predictably. In Pokémon Pearl, Palkia's awakening is depicted as spatial collapse rather than temporal distortion. Regions fold in on themselves. Locations overlap unnaturally. Travel becomes impossible because distance loses coherence. This framing makes Palkia's power feel disorienting rather than catastrophic in a conventional sense. Unlike Dialga's time fractures, which feel sudden and violent, Palkia's distortions feel confusing and destabilizing. The world does not explode, it becomes unreadable. Palkia's behavior mirrors this role. It is rarely shown acting aggressively or emotionally. When it moves, the effect is environmental rather than targeted. Space shifts as a consequence of its presence, not its intent. This lack of intent is important. Palkia does not reshape space to punish or protect. It reshapes space because it exists. Reality adjusts to accommodate it. Palkia's relationship with humans is even more distant than Dialga's. Time is something humans experience directly every moment. Space is something they often take for granted. Palkia embodies that distance. It is harder to understand, harder to conceptualize, and harder to relate to emotionally. In the anime, Palkia is often portrayed as elusive and difficult to track. Characters struggle to locate it because it does not remain in one place for long. Locations shift, portals open, and distances change without warning. This reinforces the idea that Palkia cannot be pinned down. Palkia's signature move, Spatial Rend, reflects this perfectly. It does not simply strike an opponent. It tears open space itself, creating a rift that damages anything caught within it. This is not an attack aimed at a target. It is an attack aimed at the concept of location. The visual depiction of Spatial Rend often shows space cracking or folding, emphasizing that the damage comes from instability rather than force. Being hit by it feels less like being struck and more like being caught in a collapsing environment. Palkia's movements are typically depicted as sudden and disorienting. It appears and disappears without transition. It does not travel across the battlefield. It relocates instantly. This reinforces its separation from normal movement. This instant relocation creates tension in battles. Opponents cannot rely on distance or positioning. Space itself is unreliable. Safety zones do not exist. Palkia's connection to Mount Coronet mirrors Dialga's, but with a different emphasis. Mount Coronet is described as the point where space and time intersect. For Dialga, this location stabilizes time. For Palkia, it anchors space. Disturbing that balance affects the entire region. The Sinnoh myths describe Palkia as being born alongside Dialga and Giratina, created by Arceus to structure reality. Palkia's role was to give form and dimension to existence. Without it, there is no separation between things. Everything overlaps into chaos. This mythological framing positions Palkia as a boundary keeper. It does not create objects or life. It creates separation. That separation allows identity to exist. Palkia's rivalry with Dialga is not based on conflict, but on tension. Time and space must coexist, but they exert pressure on each other. Too much spatial distortion disrupts temporal flow. Too much temporal distortion destabilizes spatial structure. When Palkia and Dialga clash, the result is not a battle in the traditional sense. It is a breakdown of reality. Cities warp, skies tear, and dimensions overlap. This is not because either wants to win. It is because balance has failed. Palkia's connection to Giratina is also significant. Giratina represents antimatter and distortion, existing outside normal space and time. Palkia defines space. Giratina exists where space breaks down. Their relationship is one of containment rather than rivalry. When space becomes unstable beyond repair, Giratina's domain becomes accessible. This implies that Palkia's role is not just creation, but prevention. It keeps reality intact enough that distortion remains separate. Palkia's absence would be catastrophic in a quiet, total way. Without space, nothing could exist in relation to anything else. There would be no distance, no separation, no orientation. Existence would collapse into a singular, meaningless point. This makes Palkia's continued presence essential, even if it is never seen. Like space itself, it is only noticed when it malfunctions. Palkia's water typing also suggests that space is fluid rather than rigid. Distances can stretch, compress, or flow. This idea is reinforced by how portals and rifts are depicted around Palkia, often resembling ripples or waves. Palkia's design avoids heavy armor or rigidity. Its smooth surfaces and flowing shape imply motion and change. Space is not something to be locked down. It must remain flexible to accommodate movement and growth. In gameplay, Palkia often feels less straightforward than Dialga. Its power is harder to predict. Its speed, reach, and teleportation abilities create uncertainty. Battles feel less stable, more reactive. Palkia does not dominate through inevitability like Dialga. It dominates through unpredictability. You never know where it will be next. This unpredictability makes Palkia unsettling. Humans rely on space to navigate, plan, and feel safe. When space itself becomes unreliable, fear sets in quickly. Palkia's presence challenges the idea of borders and boundaries. Walls, distances, and separations lose meaning. This makes containment nearly impossible. Even when captured, Palkia feels fundamentally uncontained. A Pokeball holding a being that defines space feels paradoxical. The act works mechanically, but thematically it feels fragile. Palkia's behavior remains distant and neutral, even in captivity. It does not express anger or compliance. It simply exists. In the broader Pokémon world, Palkia represents possibility and instability at the same time. Space allows exploration, travel, and connection, but when uncontrolled, it creates isolation and confusion. Palkia is not a wanderer. It is the reason wandering is possible. It does not explore worlds. It defines where worlds can exist. And because of that, Palkia stands as one of the most abstract, disorienting, and essential legendary Pokémon ever introduced. A reminder that reality depends not just on time moving forward, but on space remaining intact enough to hold everything in place. Giratina occupies a position in the Pokémon world that feels fundamentally different from Dialga and Palkia, even though it was created alongside them. Where Dialga and Palkia define the structure of reality, Giratina represents what happens when that structure fails. It is not the ruler of time or space, but the embodiment of distortion, existing where normal rules no longer apply. From its introduction in the Sinnoh region, Giratina is framed as an outcast from the natural order. According to Sinnoh mythology, it was banished by Arceus for its violent or unstable nature. This banishment was not simply punishment, it was containment. Giratina's presence was incompatible with the stable reality Dialga and Palkia were meant to maintain. Giratina's typing immediately reinforces this role. As a ghost and dragon type, it exists between states. Ghost represents absence, inversion, and things that should not be present in the physical world. Dragon represents primordial power and origin. Together, they create something ancient that does not belong where it exists, yet cannot be erased. Giratina's physical design reflects this sense of wrongness. In its altered form, its body is massive, segmented, and uneven, with spikes, tendrils, and 6 shadowy wings that feel more like restraints than tools. Its proportions are intentionally unsettling, lacking the symmetry and balance seen in Dialga and Palkia. Giratina looks unstable, as though it is constantly struggling against itself. The gold bands encircling Giratina's body are one of its most important visual elements. These bands are often interpreted as seals or restraints placed upon it, limiting its power within the normal world. Unlike Dialga's diamond or Palkia's pearl, which act as focal points of control, Giratina's bands imply suppression rather than amplification. Giratina's connection to the distortion world defines its identity more than any single ability. The distortion world is not simply another dimension. It is a place where gravity, direction, and physical laws are reversed or broken entirely. Up and down lose meaning, surfaces float freely, and logic becomes unreliable. This environment exists because Giratina exists. The distortion world is not a habitat Giratina chose. It is a manifestation of its nature. Where Dialga stabilizes time and Palkia stabilizes space, Giratina destabilizes both by existing outside their influence. In Pokémon Platinum, Giratina's role becomes far clearer than in Diamond and Pearl. It is no longer just a mysterious third figure. It becomes the counterbalance that prevents Dialga and Palkia from destroying reality when forced into conflict. Giratina intervenes not out of heroism, but necessity. This intervention reframes Giratina's exile. Rather than being purely destructive, Giratina becomes a pressure valve. It absorbs excess instability that cannot exist in the normal world. Without Giratina, distortion would have nowhere to go. Giratina's behavior reflects this role. It is not portrayed as actively malicious. It reacts to imbalance rather than causing it. When space and time are forced beyond their limits, Giratina appears as a consequence. This makes Giratina difficult to interpret morally. It is neither guardian nor villain. It is a corrective force, but one that operates through disruption rather than preservation. Order survives because disorder has somewhere to exist. Giratina's signature move, Shadow Force, reinforces this idea. Giratina disappears entirely, becoming untargetable, then reappears to strike. This is not a trick or feint. It is a literal removal from reality, followed by re-entry. Giratina does not dodge attacks, it leaves the system altogether. This ability highlights Giratina's relationship with existence itself. It does not move through space, it exits it. This places Giratina beyond conventional combat rules, reinforcing its alien nature. Giratina's origin form deepens this concept further. In this form, Giratina loses its legs and adopts a serpentine, floating shape more suited to the distortion world. Its wings transform into flowing tendrils, and its body appears less constrained by gravity or physical structure. This form is not a power upgrade in a traditional sense. It is Giratina in an environment where it no longer needs restraints. The lack of gold bands in origin form implies freedom rather than strength. The contrast between altered form and origin form emphasizes Giratina's exile. In the normal world, it is constrained and unstable. In the distortion world, it is aligned and complete. This inversion reinforces the idea that Giratina does not belong in standard reality. Giratina's relationship with Arceus is central to its lore. While Dialga and Palkia serve Arceus by maintaining reality, Giratina serves by containing what reality cannot handle. Its banishment is part of that service. This makes Giratina's role tragic rather than villainous. It is isolated not because it is evil, but because it is necessary. Balance requires exclusion. In the anime, Giratina is often portrayed as aggressive and imposing, but even then its actions are reactions to imbalance or intrusion. When the distortion world is threatened, Giratina responds forcefully. It does not negotiate, it corrects. This lack of negotiation reinforces its inhuman perspective. Giratina does not communicate through language or emotion. It communicates through consequences. Giratina's presence often causes fear because it represents loss of control. Humans rely on stable rules to feel safe. Giratina exists where those rules fail. Encountering it means entering a space where prediction no longer works. This unpredictability makes Giratina unsettling even compared to Dialga and Palkia. Time and space can be imagined, measured, and studied. Distortion cannot. It resists understanding. Giratina's ghost typing also suggests a connection to death and absence, but not in a literal sense. Giratina does not kill worlds. It removes them from coherence. Things still exist, but not in ways that can be understood. This is reflected in how the distortion world is portrayed. It is not empty. It is full of fragments, echoes, and broken structures. Reality is present, but disassembled. Giratina's continued existence ensures that reality has boundaries. Without a place for distortion, pressure would build endlessly within time and space until collapse occurred. Giratina prevents that collapse by existing outside the system. This makes Giratina essential in a way that is rarely acknowledged. It does not receive worship or reverence. It receives exile. Yet reality depends on that exile holding. In gameplay, Giratina feels heavier and more defensive than Dialga or Palkia. Its bulk, resistances, and endurance reflect its role as a container for instability. It does not overwhelm quickly. It persists. Battles against Giratina feel drawn out and oppressive rather than explosive. Progress is slow. Pressure accumulates. This mirrors its narrative role perfectly. Even when captured, Giratina feels less like a partner and more like a presence. It does not integrate easily into a team. It exists alongside, not within. Giratina's lore raises uncomfortable questions about balance. If stability requires something to be cast out, is that stability just? The games do not answer this directly, but they present Giratina's existence as unavoidable. Reality is not maintained by harmony alone, it is maintained by separation. Giratina represents everything reality cannot afford to be, yet cannot eliminate. It is excess, inversion, and contradiction given form. It is not chaos for chaos's sake. It is structured chaos, contained in a place where it can do the least harm. And that is what makes Giratina one of the most unsettling and conceptually deep, legendary Pokémon ever created. It is not feared because it wants destruction, but because it reminds us that order only exists because something else is forced to exist elsewhere. Cresselia exists in the Pokémon world as a quiet counterweight to the chaos and instability represented by Giratina. Where Giratina embodies distortion, exile, and broken structure, Cresselia represents restoration, calm, and the gentle reassembly of reality. Its presence does not command attention through force or spectacle. Instead, it stabilizes the world through subtle influence, often without being noticed at all. Introduced alongside Darkrai in the Sinnoh region, Cresselia is framed as a lunar Pokémon whose influence is tied to dreams, sleep, and emotional balance. Unlike many legendary Pokémon that reshape the physical world directly, Cresselia operates on the inner world of the mind. Its domain is not land, sky, or dimension, but the psychological state of living beings. Cresselia's design immediately reinforces this role. Its body is sleek, symmetrical, and crescent-shaped, clearly inspired by the waxing moon. The soft gradients of pink, yellow, and blue give it an ethereal quality, as if it is partially made of light rather than solid matter. There are no sharp edges or aggressive features. Everything about Cresselia communicates softness and flow. This visual softness is intentional. Cresselia is not meant to intimidate or dominate. It is meant to soothe. According to Pokédex lore, Cresselia's wings release shimmering particles that bring pleasant dreams to those who sleep nearby. These dreams are not illusions or hallucinations. They are restorative experiences that calm the mind and ease emotional strain. In the Sinnoh myths, Cresselia is described as a bringer of good dreams, while Darkrai is associated with nightmares. This contrast establishes a clear duality, but not a rivalry in the traditional sense. Cresselia does not battle Darkrai directly. It counters Darkrai's influence by repairing what nightmares damage. This distinction matters. Cresselia does not prevent darkness from existing. It helps beings recover after they have experienced it. That makes Cresselia less of a protector and more of a healer. Cresselia's role becomes especially important in the context of the distortion world and Giratina, where Giratina absorbs excess instability by existing outside reality. Cresselia absorbs emotional instability by easing the minds of those affected. One operates on a cosmic scale. The other operates on an intimate one. This makes Cresselia's power easy to overlook. There are no earthquakes, no rifts, no visible distortions. Its influence is quiet. People simply sleep better. Fear fades. Anxiety loosens its grip. In Pokémon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, Cresselia's presence is tied directly to the cure for nightmares. When Darkrai afflicts people with endless sleep and terror, Cresselia's lunar wing is the only thing capable of restoring them. This narrative framing emphasizes that Cresselia's power is not optional, It is necessary for balance. Without Cresselia, the damage caused by Darkrai would accumulate endlessly. Minds would break under the weight of fear. Recovery would not be possible. Cresselia's behavior in the games reflects its elusive nature. It does not confront players directly. Instead, it roams across the region, appearing briefly before moving on. This wandering behavior reinforces its identity as something transient and difficult to pin down. Cresselia does not stay where it is needed. It moves constantly, responding to unseen needs across the world. This makes it feel more like a phenomenon than a creature with territory. In the anime, Cresselia is portrayed as serene and distant, often appearing only when emotional distress reaches a critical point. It does not communicate verbally. Its presence alone is enough to shift the emotional atmosphere of a scene. This lack of dialogue reinforces the idea that Cresselia does not persuade or command. It influences passively. Calm spreads naturally around it. Cresselia's psychic typing is key to understanding this influence. Psychic Pokémon are often associated with intelligence, telepathy, or control, but Cresselia represents a gentler interpretation. Its psychic power is not about dominance over minds. It is about support and stabilization. This is reflected mechanically in battle. Cresselia is known for its extreme durability rather than offensive power. Its defenses and recovery options allow it to remain present for long periods, slowly outlasting opponents rather than overwhelming them. Battles against Cresselia often feel slow and drawn out. Progress is gradual. Damage accumulates slowly. This mirrors its narrative role perfectly. Cresselia does not end conflicts quickly. It endures until tension fades. This endurance is not passive. Cresselia actively resists collapse. Its continued presence prevents situations from spiraling out of control. Cresselia's connection to the moon also carries symbolic weight. The moon has long been associated with cycles, rest, and reflection. Unlike the sun, which dominates the sky, the moon governs quieter moments. Cresselia embodies this quiet authority. The lunar theme also reinforces Cresselia's relationship with time, though indirectly. Sleep marks the passage of days. Dreams process experiences. Cresselia helps ensure that time spent resting is restorative rather than damaging. This places Cresselia in a subtle relationship with Dialga. While Dialga ensures time moves forward, Cresselia ensures that those moving through time can endure it mentally. Cresselia's relationship with Darkrai is often misunderstood as a simple good versus evil dynamic. In reality, it is more complex. Darkrai does not cause nightmares intentionally in all interpretations. It is often portrayed as isolated and misunderstood, its power harming others unintentionally. Cresselia does not punish Darkrai. It compensates for Darkrai's existence. This suggests that nightmares and fear are inevitable, but recovery is possible. This framing makes Cresselia's role deeply compassionate. It does not seek to erase darkness. It accepts that darkness exists and focuses on healing afterward. Cresselia's physical movements reinforce this gentleness. It glides rather than walks or flies. There is no visible exertion. Motion feels effortless, almost dreamlike. This dreamlike movement makes it feel disconnected from gravity and physical limitations. It appears when needed and fades when its role is complete. Cresselia's rarity also contributes to its impact. Encounters are brief. There is no prolonged interaction. This scarcity mirrors how moments of true emotional relief can feel fleeting yet meaningful. In competitive contexts, Cresselia became infamous for its resilience. Its ability to stay on the field for extended periods frustrated opponents and forced slower, more thoughtful play. This mechanical identity aligns perfectly with its lore. Cresselia does not win quickly. It wins by refusing to collapse. This refusal to collapse is what truly defines Cresselia. In a world filled with catastrophic forces, violent distortions, and overwhelming power, Cresselia represents the ability to endure psychologically. It reminds the Pokémon world that survival is not just physical, minds must survive as well. Cresselia's existence suggests that balance is not achieved through force alone. It is achieved through recovery, rest, and emotional repair. Without Cresselia, nightmares would not simply scare people, they would erode them. In the broader Pokémon mythology, Cresselia represents hope without heroics. It does not stand on battlefields or deliver judgment. It simply helps the world keep going. That quiet persistence makes Cresselia unique among legendary Pokémon. It does not reshape reality. It makes reality livable. And in a universe defined by cosmic forces and existential threats, that may be one of the most important powers of all. Cobalion enters the Pokémon world not as a cosmic force or abstract concept, but as a symbol of leadership shaped by responsibility. Where Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina define the structure of reality itself, Cobalion operates within that reality as a moral anchor. It represents restraint, justice, and the difficult burden of protecting others without becoming a tyrant. Introduced in the Nova region, Cobalion is the leader of the legendary Swords of Justice. Unlike many legendary Pokémon that exist beyond human concerns, Cobalion is deeply connected to the lives of ordinary Pokémon and people. Its role is not to rule the world, but to stand between destruction and those who cannot defend themselves. Cobalion's Steel and Fighting typing immediately communicates its philosophy. Steel represents discipline, structure, and restraint. Fighting represents action, resolve, and the willingness to confront injustice directly. Together, these types form a balance between power and control. Cobalion is capable of immense force, but it does not use that force freely. Cobalion's physical design reinforces this balance. Its body is sleek and angular, with smooth metallic surfaces rather than heavy armor. It looks refined rather than brutal. The horns and sharp edges are present, but they are measured, not excessive. Everything about Cobalion's appearance suggests precision and intention. The blue coloration of Cobalion is also significant. Blue is often associated with calm, order, and clarity. Cobalion does not burn with rage or aggression. It remains composed even in conflict. This emotional restraint is central to its identity as a leader. According to Unova lore, Cobalion is the one who gathered Terrakion and Virizion, forming the Swords of Justice. This leadership is not based on dominance or fear. It is based on trust and shared purpose. Cobalion leads because it takes responsibility when others hesitate. The origin story of the Swords of Justice is rooted in tragedy. When humans destroyed forests and habitats through war and conflict, many Pokémon were harmed or displaced. Cobalion stepped forward, not to punish humanity outright, but to protect Pokémon from further harm. This distinction is important. Cobalion is not motivated by revenge. It is motivated by prevention. It does not seek to dominate humans or erase them. It seeks to limit their capacity to cause further destruction. This restraint sets Cobalion apart from more vengeful legendary figures. It recognizes that power used without control becomes indistinguishable from the threat it opposes. Cobalion's behavior reflects this philosophy consistently. It does not attack indiscriminately. It assesses situations before acting. When it does intervene, Its actions are targeted and deliberate. In the anime, Cobalion is portrayed as stern but fair. It does not show warmth easily, but it is deeply protective of those under its care. Its presence carries authority, not fear. Cobalion's signature move, Sacred Sword, reinforces this sense of principled combat. The move ignores defensive boosts, symbolizing justice that cuts through artificial protection and deception. It is not about overwhelming strength, it is about fairness. This move reflects Cobalion's worldview. Defense built on exploitation or imbalance does not deserve protection. True strength must stand on its own. Cobalion's steel typing also suggests durability and endurance. It does not rely on speed or overwhelming offense to win battles. It remains standing, absorbing pressure until opponents exhaust themselves. This patience mirrors its long-term approach to justice. Cobalion does not expect immediate results. It understands that protection is an ongoing responsibility rather than a single, decisive act. In gameplay, battles against Cobalion often feel structured and disciplined. Its moveset emphasizes consistency, defense, and reliable pressure rather than volatility. Fighting Cobalion feels like engaging with a trained guardian rather than a wild force. Cobalion's habitat choices further reinforce its role. It is often found in caves or remote areas, watching over regions quietly rather than ruling from visible thrones. Leadership, for Cobalion, does not require attention. This distance allows Cobalion to observe without interfering unnecessarily. It intervenes only when lines are crossed. Cobalion's relationship with Terrakion and Virizion highlights different aspects of leadership. Terrakion embodies raw power and direct action. Virizion embodies grace and protection of life. Cobalion balances these traits, guiding both toward a shared goal. This balance is not effortless. Cobalion must constantly mediate between extremes. Too much aggression leads to destruction. Too much passivity allows harm to continue. This tension defines Cobalion's leadership. It does not have the luxury of simple solutions. Cobalion's role also reflects themes of responsibility that appear throughout Unova's narrative. The region explores ideals, truth, and the consequences of power. Cobalion embodies the idea that ideals must be enforced carefully, or they become oppression. Unlike villains who claim to seek justice while pursuing control, Cobalion's actions consistently prioritize protection over authority. It does not demand loyalty, it earns it. Cobalion's emotional restraint can sometimes be mistaken for coldness. In reality, it carries the weight of long-term consequence. Every action it takes shapes the future of those it protects. This weight explains why Cobalion appears distant. It cannot afford impulsive decisions. Cobalion's continued existence implies that the Pokémon world requires guardians who understand limits. Not every problem can be solved through force. Some require presence, vigilance, and patience. In contrast to legendary Pokémon that reshape reality or embody natural disasters, Cobalion represents moral strength. Its power lies not in what it can destroy, but in what it chooses not to. Cobalion's capture in the games carries thematic tension. While it can be contained in a Pokeball mechanically, its role as a guardian does not disappear. It feels less like ownership and more like a temporary alliance. Cobalion does not submit. It cooperates. This distinction reinforces its identity. True leadership cannot be taken. It must be shared. Cobalion's design, lore, and behavior all point toward the same idea. Strength without restraint is dangerous. Restraint without strength is ineffective. Balance between the two is rare and necessary. In the broader Pokemon mythology, Cobalion represents the difficult middle ground between action and reflection. It stands as proof that justice in a complex world is rarely loud or dramatic. It is steady, it is watchful, it is deliberate. Cobalion does not seek to be remembered as a conqueror. It seeks to ensure that others survive long enough to have a future worth remembering. That quiet, disciplined commitment to protection is what makes Cobalion one of the most grounded and morally complex legendary Pokemon in the Pokemon world. Terrakion stands as the most physically imposing member of the Swords of Justice, embodying direct action, raw force, and unwavering resolve. Where Cobalion leads through restraint and Virizion protects through grace, Terrakion represents the moment when restraint is no longer enough. It is the answer to overwhelming destruction, the embodiment of decisive intervention when patience has failed. Introduced in the Unova region alongside its counterparts, Terrakion is framed as a legendary Pokemon whose strength is not symbolic or abstract, but immediate and tangible. Terrakion does not influence minds, ecosystems, or ideals. It changes outcomes by breaking obstacles and standing its ground when no other option remains. Terrakion's rock and fighting typing defines its philosophy clearly. Rock represents endurance, mass, and immovability. Fighting represents action, confrontation, and physical resolve. Together, they form a Pokemon that does not yield easily and does not hesitate when action is required. Terrakion is not subtle, but it is purposeful. Its physical design reinforces this identity. Terrakion's body is bulky and muscular, with thick limbs and a wide stance that suggests immense weight. Its rocky armor appears naturally grown rather than forged, giving it the look of a living fortress. Unlike Cobalion's refined metallic surfaces or Virizion's elegant form, Terrakion looks rugged and unpolished. The curved horns on Terrakion's head and its heavy, grounded posture emphasize forward momentum. It looks like a Pokemon built to charge through barriers rather than maneuver around them. Everything about its silhouette communicates impact. According to Nova lore, Terrakion played a crucial role during times of war and environmental destruction. When human conflict devastated forests and habitats, Terrakion did not wait for negotiations or balance to be restored. It acted directly, using its immense strength to repel invaders and protect Pokemon that could not defend themselves. This response highlights a key aspect of Terrakion's character. It does not operate on long-term strategy or moral nuance in the way Cobalion does. Terrakion responds to immediate threat. When something must be stopped now, Terrakion steps forward. This does not make Terrakion reckless. It makes it decisive. Its actions are driven by the belief that delay can be more dangerous than force. In situations where destruction is already underway, waiting only increases harm. Terrakion's relationship with Cobalion reflects this dynamic. Cobalion provides direction and restraint, ensuring that Terrakion's power is used only when necessary. Terrakion accepts this guidance, not out of submission, but out of trust. It understands that strength without purpose can become destructive. This trust is central to the Swords of Justice as a group. Each member embodies a different response to injustice. Terrakion represents the boundary where protection becomes confrontation. In the anime, Terrakion is often portrayed as stern and aggressive, quick to react when it senses danger. Its movements are heavy and forceful, causing the ground to shake with each step. This portrayal reinforces its identity as a physical deterrent rather than a negotiator. Terracion's signature move, Sacred Sword, shared with the other swords of justice, takes on a different meaning in its hands. While the move symbolizes justice across the group, Terracion's use of it feels less ceremonial and more brutal. It cuts through defenses by sheer force rather than finesse. Terracion's rock typing also gives it an affinity for terrain control. It thrives in mountainous regions, caves, and rocky plains, where its mass and durability provide a natural advantage. These environments allow Terrakion to anchor itself, becoming nearly impossible to dislodge. This environmental connection reinforces its role as a barrier. Terrakion does not chase threats endlessly. It positions itself where it can block further harm. Once in place, it becomes an obstacle that cannot be ignored. In gameplay, Terrakion is known for its offensive pressure and physical dominance. Battles against it feel fast and punishing. Mistakes are costly. Unlike Cresselia's slow endurance or Giratina's oppressive persistence, Terrakion overwhelms through direct impact. This mechanical identity aligns perfectly with its lore. Terrakion is the sword of justice that ends conflicts quickly. It does not drag battles out, it finishes them. However, Terrakion's power is not limitless. Its weaknesses to water, grass, ground, and psychic types force it to commit carefully. It cannot charge blindly into every situation. Even raw force has limits. These limitations are part of why Terrakion relies on the group dynamic of the Swords of Justice. Alone, its approach could fail against the wrong threats. With guidance and balance, its strength becomes decisive rather than reckless. Terrakion's emotional range is narrower than that of some other legendary Pokémon. It does not display compassion in overt ways. Its care for others is expressed through action rather than comfort. It protects by standing between danger and those at risk. This makes Terrakion feel less approachable but deeply reliable. When Terrakion appears, the message is clear. The situation has escalated beyond words. Terrakion's presence changes the tone of conflict. Negotiation ends. Boundaries are enforced. The cost of continuing aggression becomes immediately apparent. In the broader Unova narrative, Terrakion represents the reality that ideals alone cannot stop violence. Sometimes, force is required to prevent greater harm. The Pokémon world does not shy away from this complexity. Terrakion's role is not glorified. It is necessary. This distinction matters. Terrakion does not seek battle. It accepts it when there is no alternative. The contrast between Terrakion and Virizion further highlights this balance. Where Virizion protects life through speed and precision, Terrakion protects through mass and intimidation. One prevents harm by evasion. The other prevents harm by obstruction. Terrakion's capture in the games carries a different emotional weight than capturing more abstract, legendary Pokémon. It feels like forming an alliance with a living weapon, one that must be handled responsibly. Power is available, but consequences remain. Terrakion does not lose its identity. When captured, it does not become passive. It remains a force that demands respect and careful use. Terrakion's design avoids elegance in favor of presence. Its scars, rough surfaces, and uneven textures suggest experience rather than perfection. It looks like something that has endured conflict repeatedly and continues to stand. This endurance is central to its identity. Terrakion does not burn out. It does not retreat easily. It holds ground until the threat is gone. In the Pokémon world, Terrakion represents the uncomfortable truth that peace sometimes requires strength capable of enforcing it. Not all threats can be reasoned with. Not all destruction can be undone. Terrakion exists for those moments. It does not rewrite reality. It does not heal minds. It does not guide ideals. It stops what must be stopped. That blunt, unyielding role makes Terrakion one of the most grounded and intimidating legendary Pokémon in the Pokémon world, a reminder that justice sometimes arrives not as a concept, but as an immovable force standing in the way. Virizion represents a very different expression of strength within the swords of justice, one that prioritizes protection, agility, and preservation rather than confrontation or command. Where Cobalion leads through discipline and Terrakion intervenes through force, Virizion protects by moving quickly, striking precisely, and preventing harm before it can spread. Its role is quieter, but no less essential. Introduced in the Unova region, Virizion is closely associated with forests, grasslands, and places where life grows densely and delicately. It is often described as a defender of nature, but not in a passive or symbolic way. Virizion actively responds to threats against ecosystems, stepping in when destruction becomes imminent rather than after damage has already occurred. Virizion's grass and fighting typing captures this philosophy clearly. Grass represents growth, renewal, and life that must be protected. Fighting represents action, resolve, and the willingness to confront danger directly. Together, these types create a Pokémon that does not wait for destruction to finish before responding. Virizion acts early, aiming to stop harm at its source. Virizion's physical design reinforces this identity. Its body is slender and elegant, built for speed and flexibility rather than raw power. Long legs, a narrow torso, and a forward-leaning posture give it the appearance of constant readiness. It looks like a Pokémon that is always in motion, even when standing still. The leaf-like horns and flowing shapes along Virizion's body visually connect it to plant life. Unlike the metallic rigidity of Cobalion or the rocky mass of Terrakion, Virizion's form feels organic and adaptive. It looks like something that belongs in living environments, not something imposed upon them. According to Unova lore, Virizion played a key role in protecting Pokémon during times of human conflict and environmental destruction. When forests were burned and habitats were destroyed, Virizion moved swiftly to shield vulnerable Pokémon, guiding them to safety and driving off threats before damage could escalate. This role highlights an important distinction. Virizion does not rebuild what has already been destroyed. That task belongs to time and nature itself. Virizion's purpose is prevention. It exists to ensure that destruction does not reach a point where recovery becomes impossible. Virizion's behavior reflects this urgency. It does not linger in one place. It patrols large territories, moving quickly between regions where danger may arise. This mobility allows it to respond to multiple threats without becoming tied down. In the anime, Virizion is often portrayed as alert and focused, with sharp awareness of its surroundings. It does not waste movement or attention. Every action feels purposeful, as though it is constantly evaluating risk. Virizion's signature move, Sacred Sword, takes on a particularly clean and precise meaning in its hands. Rather than overpowering defenses through brute force, Virizion's strikes feel surgical. It cuts through obstacles cleanly, minimizing collateral damage. This precision is central to Virizion's identity. It understands that protecting life requires restraint as much as action. Uncontrolled force can cause as much harm as the threat itself. Virizian's speed is one of its defining traits. It moves quickly enough to intercept danger before it reaches vulnerable areas. This speed is not chaotic. It is controlled and intentional, allowing Virizion to position itself exactly where it is needed. In gameplay, Virizion often feels agile and tactical. Battles emphasize timing, positioning, and efficient use of moves rather than prolonged exchanges. Success comes from outmaneuvering opponents rather than overpowering them. Virizion's weaknesses to fire, ice, poison, flying, psychic, and fairy types reinforce its need for caution. It cannot withstand every threat head-on. This vulnerability pushes Virizion toward avoidance and precision rather than endurance. These limitations are part of why Virizion works best as part of the Swords of Justice rather than alone. Cobalion provides structure and restraint. Terrakion provides force when necessary. Virizion fills the gap between them, ensuring that action is taken early and with care. Virizion's emotional expression is subtle. It does not display overt anger or fear. Its concern for life is shown through movement and intervention rather than comfort or reassurance. It protects by acting. This subtlety can make Virizion seem distant, but it reflects a deep respect for balance. Virizion does not impose itself unnecessarily. It intervenes only when the cost of inaction becomes too high. Virizion's association with forests and grasslands carries symbolic weight. These environments are resilient but vulnerable. They can recover from small disturbances, but collapse under sustained harm. Virizion exists to prevent that sustained harm from taking hold. This role makes Virizion particularly sensitive to gradual threats. Unlike Terrakion, which responds to immediate violence, Virizion is alert to slow destruction. Deforestation, pollution, and encroachment trigger its response. Virizion's grass typing also reinforces themes of regrowth and continuity. While it focuses on prevention, its presence supports recovery by ensuring that enough life remains to grow back. In contrast to legendary Pokémon that reshape reality or enforce cosmic balance, Virizion operates on a local, ecological scale. Its concerns are specific and immediate. A forest, a group of Pokémon, a threatened habitat. This grounded focus makes Virizion feel more personal. Its actions directly affect living beings rather than abstract concepts. Virizion's capture in the games carries an interesting tension. While it can be captured and used in battle, its identity as a protector does not disappear. Using Virizion aggressively can feel at odds with its lore, encouraging thoughtful play. This tension reflects Virizion's core philosophy. Power exists to protect, not to dominate. When power is used carelessly, balance is lost. Virizion's design avoids intimidation in favor of clarity. Its clean lines, bright coloration, and graceful movement make its intentions readable. It does not hide its purpose. In the broader Pokémon mythology, Virizion represents proactive care. It shows that protection is not always loud or forceful. Sometimes it is fast, precise, and preventative. Virizion does not wait for catastrophe. It moves early. It intervenes quietly. It ensures that life continues without needing to be rescued later. That emphasis on prevention, balance, and agile protection makes Virizion one of the most understated yet vital legendary Pokémon in the Pokémon world. A reminder that the best defense often happens before anyone realizes danger was ever present. Thunderous represents volatility sharpened into intent, a force of nature that does not merely disrupt the world, but actively challenges it. Where Tornadus embodies movement without direction, Thunderous embodies power without restraint. Its storms are not just chaotic, they are aggressive, charged, and deliberately overwhelming, turning the sky itself into a weapon. Introduced in the Unova region, Thunderous is one of the forces of nature, standing alongside Tornadus and Landorus. While all three are associated with weather, Thunderous is defined by lightning and thunder, phenomena that strike suddenly, violently, and with little warning. Its presence transforms the atmosphere from unstable to outright hostile. Thunderous's electric and flying typing communicates this identity clearly. Electric represents raw energy, sudden release, and destructive potential. Flying connects that energy to the sky, storms, and uncontrolled elevation. Together, these types create a Pokémon that thrives in high-tension environments where pressure builds until it explodes. Thunderous's physical design reflects this constant state of tension. Like Tornadus, its lower body is formed from swirling clouds, removing any sense of grounding or stability. However, Thunderous's upper body appears more muscular and rigid, giving it a posture that feels confrontational rather than playful. Its expression is sharp and aggressive, suggesting intent rather than impulse. The spiked tail carried by Thunderous is a particularly important detail. According to Pokédex descriptions, Thunderous uses this tail to fire lightning bolts. This transforms its power from environmental to targeted. Lightning is no longer just a byproduct of storms, it becomes a directed attack. This distinction separates Thunderous from Tornadus in a meaningful way. Tornadus creates conditions that cause damage indirectly. Thunderous delivers damage directly. It does not wait for destruction to occur. It causes it. In Unova lore, Thunderous is associated with severe thunderstorms that scorch land, topple structures, and disrupt entire regions. Its storms are not described as cleansing or renewing. They are destructive and frightening, often leaving lasting damage behind. This framing paints Thunderous as more antagonistic than Tornadus. While Tornadus feels indifferent, Thunderous feels confrontational. Its storms feel personal, as though the sky itself is striking back. In the anime, Thunderous is often portrayed as aggressive and difficult to reason with. It reacts strongly to perceived threats and escalates conflicts quickly. Attempts to calm or redirect it frequently fail, resulting in widespread damage before intervention occurs. This behavior reinforces Thunderous's role as escalation incarnate. When tension exists, Thunderous amplifies it. Small disturbances become disasters. Thunderous's signature move, Thunderbolt, and its association with thunder in storm conditions emphasize this amplification. Lightning in the Pokémon world is rarely subtle. It arrives suddenly and leaves immediate impact. Thunderous thrives in these moments of release. Its incarnate form emphasizes this hostility. Its movements are sharp, its posture forward-leaning, and its cloud base appears denser and more turbulent. Everything about this form suggests compression and imminent release. Thunderous's Therian form introduces a more streamlined, dragon-like shape, emphasizing speed and pursuit. In this form, Thunderous feels less like a stationary storm and more like a hunting force, chasing targets through the sky and striking repeatedly. Despite this change in form, the core identity remains the same. Thunderous is about overwhelming force applied quickly. Whether hovering or chasing, its goal is domination of the immediate space around it. Thunderous's relationship with Tornadus is often depicted as competitive and volatile. The two are known to clash, their combined storms causing massive destruction. This rivalry is not based on ideology or territory. It is based on excess, too much movement and too much energy colliding at once. These clashes explain why Landorus's role is so critical. Landorus exists to stabilize the aftermath of their conflicts, restoring balance to the land after storms have passed. Without Landorus, the destruction caused by Thundurus would accumulate endlessly. This dynamic positions Thundurus as a catalyst. It does not exist to maintain balance. It exists to test it, often pushing systems beyond their limits. In gameplay, Thundurus often feels oppressive. Its speed, special attack, and access to strong electric-type moves allow it to apply constant pressure. Opponents are rarely given time to recover or reposition. Momentum belongs to Thundurus. This mechanical identity mirrors its lore perfectly. Thundurus does not allow situations to stabilize. It keeps pressure high until something breaks. However, Thundurus is not without limits. Its weaknesses to ice and rock types represent natural counters to storms. Ice grounds energy, while rock resists wind and lightning. These weaknesses remind players that even the most violent forces can be checked. Thundurus's electric typing also carries symbolic weight. Electricity represents potential energy waiting to be released. Thundurus embodies the moment of release itself. There is no buildup once it arrives. Discharge is immediate. This immediacy makes Thundurus frightening. There is no warning phase. Storm clouds gather, lightning strikes, and damage is done before preparation is possible. Thundurus's emotional range is narrow and intense. It does not display curiosity, compassion, or restraint. Its reactions are fast and extreme. Anger escalates quickly. Calm rarely appears. This lack of emotional modulation separates Thundurus from legendary Pokémon that carry moral weight or introspection. Thundurus does not reflect, it reacts. That reactivity makes it dangerous in a way that feels very real. Many disasters in the Pokémon world are not caused by evil intent, but by unchecked escalation. Thundurus embodies that principle. Thundurus's capture in the games feels especially fragile thematically. Containing lightning in a Pokéball suggests temporary control rather than true containment. The power remains volatile, waiting to be released. Using Thundurus effectively requires understanding its nature. It rewards aggressive play and decisive action. Hesitation wastes its greatest strength, which is pressure. This reinforces the idea that Thundurus cannot be used carefully. It must be used deliberately. Indecision only increases risk. In the broader Pokémon mythology, Thundurus represents the danger of unchecked energy. It shows what happens when power exists without patience or restraint. Progress becomes destruction. Momentum becomes collapse. Thundurus does not exist to teach balance. It exists to show what imbalance looks like. Its storms are not lessons. They are warnings. They remind the Pokémon world that energy, once released, cannot be taken back. Damage happens instantly. Consequences follow. That raw, confrontational embodiment of power is what makes Thundurus one of the most intimidating legendary Pokémon ever created. It is not feared because it is evil, but because it represents the moment when tension becomes disaster and the sky itself turns against everything beneath it. Landorus exists as the stabilizing force among the forces of nature, a presence defined not by destruction or volatility, but by restoration, balance, and continuity. Where Tornadus and Thundurus represent movement and energy, pushed to dangerous extremes, Landorus represents what remains after the storm. It is not the calm before chaos, but the grounding force that allows the world to recover once chaos has passed. Introduced in the Unova region, Landorus is framed as the mediator of atmospheric conflict. While Tornadus and Thunderous roam freely and clash violently, Landorus intervenes to repair the damage they leave behind. Its role is not to stop storms from happening, but to ensure that life can continue afterward. Landorus's ground and flying typing reflects this dual responsibility. Ground represents stability, fertility, and connection to land. Flying connects it to the sky and the forces that act upon the land from above. Together, these types position Landorus as the bridge between heaven and earth, capable of understanding both turbulence and stillness. This balance is immediately visible in Landorus's design. Like Tornadus and Thunderous, its lower body is formed from clouds, linking it to the sky. However, its upper body is heavier and more solid, with a broader frame and grounded posture. Landorus looks anchored even while airborne, as if gravity itself responds differently around it. The orange coloration of Landorus and the rugged features of its face give it a more mature, weathered appearance compared to its counterparts. It does not look mischievous like Tornadus or aggressive like Thunderous. It looks patient and experienced, like something that has seen destruction repeatedly and understands what must come next. According to Nova lore, Landorus is revered as a guardian of the land. When Tornadus and Thunderous clash, their storms ravage fields, flood settlements, and leave regions barren. Landorus follows, enriching the soil, restoring crops, and returning balance to affected areas. This cycle frames Landorus not as a reactionary force, but as a necessary conclusion. This restorative role gives Landorus a fundamentally different relationship with humanity. While Tornadus and Thunderous are feared, Landorus is respected. Legends describe people offering gratitude to Landorus for bountiful harvests and fertile land after devastating storms. This respect is not based on worship in the cosmic sense. It is practical appreciation. Landorus provides something tangible: survival. Landorus's signature move, Earth Power, reflects this connection to the ground. Unlike attacks that focus on sudden bursts or chaos, Earth Power reshapes terrain, channeling energy upward from the land itself. It feels steady and inevitable rather than explosive. In battle, Landorus often feels commanding rather than oppressive. Its presence changes the flow of combat by establishing control rather than overwhelming force. It positions itself, applies pressure consistently, and forces opponents to respond to the terrain it dominates. Landorus's incarnate form emphasizes authority and balance. Its posture is upright and composed, with deliberate movements rather than erratic motion. It feels like a judge overseeing forces that would otherwise spiral out of control. Landorus's Therian form shifts this authority into a more beast-like expression. Its quadrupedal shape emphasizes raw connection to the earth, speed, and dominance over terrain. In this form, Landorus becomes less symbolic and more physical, embodying the land itself rather than its governance. Despite this shift, the core identity remains consistent. Whether standing upright or moving on all fours, Landorus exists to stabilize. It does not escalate conflict. It ends cycles. Landorus's relationship with Tornadus and Thunderous is essential to understanding its importance. The trio does not represent equal forces. Tornadus and Thunderous create imbalance. Landorus resolves it. Without Landorus, the destruction caused by storms would accumulate endlessly, making long-term survival impossible. This framing positions Landorus as the most necessary of the three. Chaos can exist without purpose. Restoration cannot. Landorus's behavior in the anime reflects this maturity. It often appears after storms have subsided, surveying damage and acting to restore balance. It does not pursue confrontation unless absolutely necessary. Its presence alone often signals that the worst has passed. This restraint distinguishes Landorus from many legendary Pokémon that resolve problems through power displays. Landorus resolves problems through persistence and care. Landorus's ground typing also ties it closely to agriculture and growth. Ground-type Pokémon are often associated with endurance and terrain control, but Landorus adds fertility to that identity. The land does not merely exist, it becomes productive. This fertility is central to why Landorus is viewed positively. It does not just prevent collapse, it enables recovery. Life returns because Landorus remains. In gameplay, Landorus has become one of the most influential Pokémon competitively due to its versatility, bulk, and ability to control momentum. This mechanical dominance mirrors its lore perfectly. Landorus does not rely on gimmicks. It controls the fundamentals of battle. Its weaknesses to water and ice types reinforce the idea that even stability has limits. Floods and freezing can undo recovery. Balance must be maintained continuously. This ongoing maintenance is part of Landorus's identity. Restoration is not a one-time event. It is constant work. Landorus's emotional range feels broader than that of Tornadus or Thundurus. While it does not express warmth directly, it shows concern through action. Its protection of land and life suggests long-term awareness rather than impulse. This awareness gives Landorus a sense of responsibility that its counterparts lack. It understands consequences. It acts with future outcomes in mind. Landorus's capture in the games carries symbolic weight. Aligning with Landorus feels like gaining access to stability itself. It does not feel like controlling a storm, but partnering with recovery. Using Landorus effectively requires patience and planning. It rewards consistency rather than risk-taking. This playstyle reinforces its narrative role as a stabilizer. In the broader Pokémon mythology, Landorus represents the idea that balance is not automatic. It must be restored actively. Chaos may be exciting and powerful, but survival depends on what comes after. Landorus does not prevent storms. It ensures they do not end everything. It allows cycles to continue, fields to regrow, and communities to rebuild. In a world filled with legendary Pokémon that embody extremes, Landorus stands out by representing continuity. It is the force that allows life to move forward after disaster, not by erasing the past, but by rebuilding from it. That quiet, grounded persistence is what makes Landorus one of the most important legendary Pokémon in the Pokémon world. Without it, storms would be final. With it, recovery becomes possible. Legendary Pokémon exist in the Pokémon world to answer a very different kind of question than ordinary species. They are not designed to represent growth through training, adaptation through environment, or bonding through companionship. Instead, legendary Pokémon represent forces, ideas, and pressures that shape the world whether humans are present or not. They are not part of the ecosystem in the traditional sense. They are the framework that allows the ecosystem to exist at all. Across regions and generations, legendary Pokémon consistently appear at moments where balance is threatened or questioned. Their presence signals that something larger than individual conflict is at stake. This does not always mean destruction is imminent. Sometimes it means instability, excess, or misuse of power. Legendary Pokemon emerge not because the world is ending, but because the world is drifting out of alignment. This framing is important. Legendary Pokemon are rarely proactive in the way heroes are. They do not seek out problems. They react to conditions. When they appear, it is because the systems they represent are being strained. Time fractures, space collapses, land is devastated, storms escalate, dreams become unbearable. Legendary Pokemon do not create these problems. They reveal them. One of the most consistent traits of legendary Pokemon is their emotional distance from humanity. Even those that protect people or Pokemon rarely do so out of affection. Their concern is structural rather than personal. They protect balance, continuity, and survival on a scale that dwarfs individual lives. This distance makes them difficult to understand and often impossible to negotiate with. That distance is not cruelty, it is scale. Legendary Pokemon operate on timelines and systems far larger than personal motivation. Expecting them to behave like companions misunderstands their role. They are not meant to relate. They are meant to endure. This is why legendary Pokemon often feel overwhelming rather than approachable. Their power is not calibrated for fairness or learning. It is calibrated for necessity. When they act, the results are immediate and far-reaching. Cities distort. Landscapes change. Entire regions feel the impact. At the same time, legendary Pokemon are rarely portrayed as malicious. Even the most destructive among them act according to their nature rather than intent. Storms do not hate the land they destroy. Distortion does not seek suffering. Time does not choose who it affects. Legendary Pokemon follow the logic of their existence. This neutrality is what makes them unsettling. There is no moral leverage. You cannot appeal to empathy or reason with inevitability. The only thing that matters is balance. Another key aspect of legendary Pokemon is that they are not interchangeable. Each one exists to fulfill a specific role. Removing one does not strengthen the system, it weakens it. Time without space collapses. Space without time becomes meaningless. Storms without restoration become extinction. Justice without restraint becomes tyranny. This interdependence is central to Pokémon mythology. Legendary Pokémon are not a hierarchy where one dominates all others. They are a network of pressures that must coexist carefully. When one is pushed too far, others respond. This is why conflicts involving legendary Pokémon are so dangerous. They are not battles between individuals. They are collisions between systems. When two legendary Pokémon clash, reality itself becomes unstable because the balance between their roles is being disrupted. Human interference often serves as the catalyst for these conflicts. Teams and individuals attempt to control legendary Pokémon, not understanding that these forces cannot be isolated from the systems they support. When a legendary Pokémon is forced into a role it was not meant to play, consequences ripple outward. This theme appears repeatedly across regions. Power used without understanding leads to collapse. Legendary Pokémon do not punish this behavior out of spite. They respond because the system demands correction. Capturing legendary Pokémon in Pokeballs is one of the most interesting contradictions in the series. Mechanically, it works. Narratively, it feels fragile. The idea that a force governing reality can be contained by a human tool highlights the difference between gameplay necessity and thematic truth. Even when captured, legendary Pokémon rarely feel owned. They feel borrowed. Their power remains conditional. The implication is that control exists only as long as balance is maintained. This tension reinforces the idea that legendary Pokémon are not meant to be used casually. They represent responsibility rather than reward. Using them recklessly risks recreating the very imbalance they exist to prevent. Legendary Pokémon also serve an important narrative function for the player. They introduce humility. No matter how strong a trainer becomes, legendary Pokémon remind them that they are operating within a much larger system. Victory over a legendary Pokémon does not make the player superior. It makes them involved. That involvement carries weight. The player becomes a temporary participant in maintaining balance rather than a conqueror reshaping the world at will. This shift in perspective is subtle but powerful. It reframes success from domination to coexistence. The goal is not to replace legendary Pokémon, but to prevent their roles from being misused. Legendary Pokémon also give the Pokémon world a sense of age and continuity. They imply that the world existed long before the player arrived and will continue long after they leave. These forces do not begin with the story and do not end when it concludes. This permanence makes the world feel alive rather than staged. Events feel like chapters in a much longer history rather than isolated narratives. Another important aspect of legendary Pokémon is that they are rarely understood fully. Myths conflict, stories vary, perspectives differ. This uncertainty is intentional. When dealing with forces beyond human scale, complete understanding is unrealistic. The Pokémon world embraces this ambiguity. Legendary Pokémon are described through legend rather than documentation. Their true nature remains partially unknown. This keeps them from becoming solved problems. That mystery is essential. Once something is fully understood, it loses its power to inspire caution and respect. Legendary Pokémon remain powerful because they remain unknowable. Despite their distance, legendary Pokémon often reflect very human concerns. Time, space, destruction, restoration, justice, fear, and recovery are all themes rooted in human experience. Legendary Pokémon externalize these ideas, giving them form and consequence. This externalization allows the Pokémon world to explore complex ideas without direct moral preaching. The consequences speak for themselves. When balance is disrupted, suffering follows. When balance is restored, life continues. Legendary Pokémon are not teachers in the traditional sense. They do not explain lessons. They demonstrate outcomes. This makes them effective narrative tools. They show what happens when systems are respected or ignored. They embody cause and effect on a grand scale. In contrast to starter Pokémon, which grow alongside the player, legendary Pokémon remind the player of their limits. Both roles are necessary. Growth without humility becomes arrogance. Power without context becomes destruction. Legendary Pokémon exist to preserve that context. They are not meant to be friendly. They are not meant to be fair. They are meant to be necessary. In the Pokémon world, legendary Pokémon represent the forces that cannot be trained away, reasoned with easily, or replaced. They are the pillars that hold everything else up. And as long as those pillars remain standing, the world continues, imperfect but intact.